We're talking about Daniel Bellinger's gigantic arms. Did you see this dude show up? What's going on here, Dan? He's more than likely going to receive some sort of just slip from the NFL. Like, bro, what the hell is going on with your workout routine?
I actually read the entire Daniel Bellinger interview, the transcript of it. Shout out to BBI for that. I really feel like Daniel Bellinger gives one of the better interviews on the Giants right now overall. So I would definitely suggest people go read that. He just seems like a very genuine player, a very genuine person, a very hard worker. And he even, has a little bit of that self-deprecation type humor, which I always like, that really, the awareness. He's like, look, I know that picture's been going around. There was some really good lighting. Okay. It was some really good lighting. Camera guy got me on that one. But he did say that, look, I thought this was interesting. He said, I weigh about the same as what I weighed last year. He's just like the weight. And he said, I might even be a little bit lighter overall. But he's like, the just weight is distributed differently because he's cut a lot of fat on his body and he's turned a lot of that fat into muscle. And so there's a really good chance that we could see a quicker version of Daniel Bellinger this year. Someone who gets on that vertical plane up the seam a little bit faster, someone who moves on those crossers a little bit faster, and ultimately someone who presents himself as an even bigger weapon in the passing game than he was as a rookie because as a rookie, Daniel Bellinger did some nice things in the passing game. I think most of it was concentrated on those design bootlegs and those kind of space routes right around the line of scrimmage. Probably what he's done here is reshape his body to the point where he's lost about 5, maybe 6, 7 pounds of fat, converted it all to muscle, and in the process dropped a few pounds. We could be looking at someone who is a much bigger vertical threat in year 2.
Much bigger vertical threat, which is going to coincide very well with having Darren Waller there. They're both could be vertical threats there. With your 12 personnel package off the play action, you can run one on an over, one up the seam. It's going to really stress safeties. Dan, how many times do you see these tight ends come into the NFL rookie season block as well as Daniel Bellinger? It's a pretty rare phenomenon. And he, I would say, was one of the better blocking tight ends we've seen on the New York Giants, at least since I've been covering this team.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there was a better blocker since I've been covering this team. I think that in his one season with the Giants, Martellus Bennett maybe offered a little bit more than Bellinger did as a blocker, but that's also frame-based too. Like Bellinger doesn't simply have the same kind of frame that the Bennetts have. Outside of him, and he was only here for a year, I would agree with you. I'm not so sure anyone's made that kind of impact. And that's the same kind of, and we're talking about an impact he made as a rookie. I remember when we were breaking down his film and talking about what he could do as a rookie, we discussed like, okay, well, these guys got some good reps as a blocker on film, but then you have to ask yourself the question, like, all right, well, he played at San Diego State. Like, how much is that going to translate when you're facing NFL level players? Because whoever he's blocking against at San Diego State was 30, 40 pounds, way shorter, not as lengthy frame wise, but it did translate. It translated already in year 1. He wasn't the most dominant blocker in the NFL at the tight end position, but I think he positioned himself as honestly like a top 12 blocker already in year 1. And that's only going to get better if he's converting some of that fat to muscle. Technique is only going to improve. It leads me to something that I saw today. Matt Harmon, who's a former guest of the show. We've had him on before. He's the creator of Reception Perception, where he essentially watches the tape of all wide receivers and then breaks down their film by assigning them percentage grades on how often they get open on each route of the route tree. So it's not about if the ball comes to them, it's just about if they get open. Matt Harmon was talking to George Kittle recently on his podcast, and he asked Kittle who are like the next great tight ends in the NFL. And one of the players that Kittle mentioned was Daniel Bellinger of the New York Giants. And what's interesting about that is also earlier this offseason, I believe it was a few weeks ago, Travis Kelce. Now you got the best and the second best tight end in the NFL, George Kittle and Travis Kelce. And anyone who wants to argue about who's the second best after Travis Kelce and says anyone other than George Kittle, personally, I'm just going to tell you you're wrong because you're not factoring in the blocking aspect as much because George Kittle is the best blocking tight end left in the NFL in addition to whatever he gives you as a receiver. But both of those guys mentioned Daniel Bellinger as one of the next great tight ends, and they've both worked with him at the tight end university, and he's going to be there again this summer at tight end university again. So they've worked with him closely. And part of why they were so hyped on him, believing he could be the next best tight end, is because of his work ethic. That's what they both mentioned. They love the way his attitude, and they love the way he goes about working. And I feel like that shows when you come up to camp converting 6, 7 pounds of fat into muscle in year 1 and year 2. Like, it shows that you're working your ass off during the offseason. So there's a lot to like about Bellinger moving forward. Remember, he didn't really drop any passes either last year. I can't really remember too many drops where we were just like, oh, you got to make that catch. That wasn't his MO either. Good hands, soft hands, great blocker already. Could offer more in the vertical passing game. Now he's converted some of that fat to muscle. I really like what I see here.
So a very sure-handed player. And this kind of speaks to the challenge that this coaching staff has, right? I don't want to say it's a problem. It's more of a challenge because it's a good problem to have. Darren Waller, you bring him in. He's a top 5 tight end in this league. And we can get into that in a little bit. Andy Bischoff talked about just how much of a difference maker he is and how he's in that same tier, at least with the Mark Andrews of the world and the Travis Kelce's and the George Kittles when he's healthy. Daniel Bellinger, though, you want to get this guy on the field, and he will be out there in 12 personnel, but how much are the Giants going to use 12 personnel? And that is compounded by the fact that the Giants have all of these wide receivers who they more than likely also want to get snaps to. So I think just that challenge overall is something that's going to be fascinating, and I want to see it play out throughout training camp. And it might be a week-to-week basis type of thing, as we've said previously on the podcast, based on matchup, based on who the Giants are going up against. But I don't want Daniel Bellinger to be riding pine, bro. This guy is good enough and has a lot of growth potential. And obviously, as you said, he's very conscientious and he puts in the hard work. I want to see this guy out on the football field.
And speaking to how they would get him on the football field, or how they get both of those players on the football field, I did see something. I think it was shout out to Giants fan in Charlotte. I think he asked Dan Duggan, who was at minicamp, who's covering the Giants for The Athletic, if there were any examples of what we saw at the end of last season, which was Daniel Bellinger getting in the lineup, but not as a traditional inline tight end and not as a big slot either. He got in the lineup as a fullback, and he was like, yeah, we saw some of that already in minicamp as well. In addition, obviously, you have heard Paris Campbell starting to take some snaps at running back as well, as the Giants kind of lean into the offense they designed last year with Kafka and Dable, which is going to involve a lot of pre-snap motion, which we love. It's going to involve some running backs in the backfield, some running backs taking jet sweep type handoffs, some running backs coming in reverse, and Paris Campbell will be one of them. But obviously, Bellinger is going to work into the backfield mix as well, more likely as a receiver, but you can also then use him as a blocker as well as a lead blocker, because I'm sure he can pick that up fast. Like I said, he's a hard worker. That's where he draws all this praise from Kittle and Kelce, and he's converted his body. Right now, it looks like, I mean, he says don't make too much of that picture, but it looks like he's in as perfect shape as you can get, right? Like for his body type, he's basically converted everything to muscle at this point. Doesn't look like he has any fat on him. He still has a great frame. He entered the NFL with a great tight end frame, great athleticism as well, testing wise. There's not a lot of reason not to like Daniel Bellinger right now. There's a lot of reason to like what Daniel Bellinger can give them to this, can add to this offense. And like you said, it's just a numbers game right now. We'll have to see how that plays out.